very happy to be in this seminar. I'm only sorry that it couldn't be in person. I would have loved to have a, I like to have a lively discussion. So I want you all to kind of try to get over your British manners and interrupt me if there's a question. So feel free to unmute yourself and jump in if something isn't clear. I'm going to give a fairly, this is going to be a computer scientist talk, so it's going to be a little bit technical, but I'm assuming no prior knowledge. So if I fail to do my job and explain some basic term, please go ahead and stop me. So, okay, so here's what I'm planning to do in this talk. I want to focus on one particular corner of cryptocurrencies. This is Bitcoin's Lightning Network. And basically, I want to show you what it is and how it works. I'm going to go into the kind of high-level details. And the reason I want to show you this is to show you how we can do various attacks on this Lightning protocol. So I hope this kind of sheds light on what we do when we test out protocols from the computer science perspective, and how we are facing different challenges when we are designing them. And this is based on joint work with several students and collaborators, Sal Tochner, Stefan Schmidt, Ayelet Mizrahi, John Harris, all in various papers. And I hope we get to a lot of these. So let me start by putting aside what I'm not going to go deep into, and this is Bitcoin's decentralized ledger. I'm going to ignore the, how the blockchain specifically works, but I would say, we have a large network of computers which are running a Bitcoin protocol. They each hold a copy of the ledger, and we'll talk exactly about what they're holding. And this copy has to be updated when a transaction occurs, right? So if you buy a stick of gum with Bitcoin in, well, not in China because you can't, you're not supposed to use it in China now, but in Israel, maybe if you find somebody who will sell you a stick of gum, the ledger on all of these computers has to be updated. Okay, so this could be, maybe on the order of thousands of machines spread out around the world. And one important aspect is that this information has to be synchronized. We have to agree on where the money is. So there's a consensus protocol that's basically running in the background, the Nakamoto consensus. You've probably heard the term, which synchronizes all this information. And now, what we've learned, relatively quickly after Bitcoin got started, is that this is a very robust system, but it comes at a cost. It scales relatively poorly, which means we have to do a lot of networking. We have to do a lot of communication across the internet. Every time, somebody has a transaction, we have to update all these machines. We have to store this ledger in every, there is literally a copy of it in every single computer, and every computer checks to see that everything is correct. We check signatures, we check the amounts. Everything has to be verified by everyone. So if you're a computer scientist and you're looking at a system like this, you're seeing a lot of redundancy. Everybody's repeating work that was done somewhere else. And it has economic consequences. It basically means that transactions in Bitcoin and in other ledgers, at least to begin with, are very slow and very expensive. They cost a lot in fees, and especially fees go up if there is congestion, if there is a lot of competition for the scarce resource of transactions per second. So this is the state where Bitcoin began. So it was a very interesting system, but it had its limitations. And so people started working on scalability of Bitcoin really quickly. And one of the first approaches was to try to find better consensus protocols, to do the synchronization of information much more efficiently. And then maybe we can do more transactions per second. And this is really a very active line of research. There's another alternative that people are always talking about, but I think nobody's really solved satisfactorily, is to do something called sharding, basically to distribute the work between the different machines so they don't repeat each other. So basically to shard the data, to break it up into pieces and to have different computers handle different accounts or different wallets for people. And this is really still an open problem. We don't know how to do that really well. There's another line of work that I won't go into, which is based on very fancy advances in cryptography and theoretical computer science, which is called delegated computation. So there's a way to do scalability there. I won't go into how that works. And there's finally the approach that I'm going to be talking about, which is the Lightning Protocol. And they're also named in general off-chain payment channels. I'm going to talk about that and how this is supposed to provide scalability for Bitcoin. And I'll show you why it doesn't exactly work yet. Okay, so that's my plan for now. Any questions thus far? Okay. Again, really feel free to interrupt. I mean, if this was a seminar in Israel, people would be already asking questions. So don't be shy. So this is the thing we're going to talk about. So I need you to know two things in computer science before we start, and I'm just going to describe them in an abstract way. I'm assuming no background for this talk. So one thing I need you to know that's there, you probably, some of you might know this already. There is such a thing called cryptographic signatures. You can digitally sign a message in a way that is unforgeable, that nobody else can forge. And to verify this signature, you need two things, right? If you have the message, you need something called the public key of the signer. If Alice is the person who signed the message, then Alice's public key is something that we need to check this signature against. And you need the message itself. And this is because the signature, that when I sign a message digitally, the signature cannot be copied over to another message. It's paired together with the message, and we can verify it against something called the public key of the signer. So this is one cryptographic primitive, and from now on, I'm going to really treat it like signatures because the abstraction really holds well, right? If we have some important message and we sign, like we sign checks, for example, this pretty much works the same way. The signature we assume is non-forgeable, and it's written on the message. You cannot basically take it over and copy it over to another message. So this mental image of signatures that we have in our head is sufficiently good. The other thing I need you to know about, and I think fewer people usually know about this, but in cryptocurrencies, this is very important, is this notion of cryptographic hash functions. Okay, so what is a cryptographic hash function? It's basically a way to take a long message, a message of arbitrary length, and convert it via some prescribed computation to this jumbled short message, which is, for example, 256 bits. So let me give you an example of what a cryptographic hash is. So for example, I have to say maybe that this output is supposed to look really random. So it's going to be really gibberish. So for example, if I take the message hello, right, this is just a string of characters, just a series of characters, and I apply a cryptographic hash function to it, one that is called SHA-256, that is often used in Bitcoin. What you get as output is this long hexadecimal sequence, which just looks random. Where did that come from? It's just a product of this algorithm. And if I take the same message and I change a single character, right, the resulting string of bits here, or the resulting output, is completely different. It looks random again, just as if I generated something completely fresh, and there's no way to see that these are necessarily two, the hashes of two strings that are very similar to each other. So the thing I need you to know about hash functions is just one fact. These cryptographic hash functions, because they, every time we run them on input, they generate exactly the same output, right? So if I run SHA-256 on the message hello, it will always generate a string of characters exactly. But there is no way if I'm given this result, if I'm giving this very long string of numbers, without anybody telling me what the original string was, I don't have a way of finding it, recovering it easily. Okay, I can try different strings, different inputs, but I have to go by brute force, just trying a lot of things until I find the exact same sequence of numbers here that I've been given. So that usually takes ages and ages to do. So this is the basic primitive from which a lot of computer science protocols are built. And I'm going to need it to show you how the Lightning Network works in our case. Okay, any questions about this? I think this is something that's important to understand. Okay, feel free to stop me again if something that I say later doesn't make sense. Okay, so now let's talk for a moment about what it means to own Bitcoins from the technical perspective. Okay, so Bitcoin's ledger is basically just a list of amounts, and each amount is associated with something called a Bitcoin script. Okay, so you can think of a Bitcoin script as a small computer program that tells you who is allowed to move the money. Okay, so for example, you could have an amount of 1 Bitcoin associated with this. This is a small computer program. It has just 2 things in it: a public key and an operation that says check the signature against this public key. So when we want to reassign money, when we want to move money, or when I want to prove that I am the owner of Bitcoin, of this 1 Bitcoin, I have to give this small program an input that makes it run and return correct or true. So for example, I can give a signature, and this together runs. This operation says check the signature against this public key. If I gave the right signature, this means I get to move the Bitcoin. So that's what it means to own Bitcoins. I just have to be able to produce this right signature or to answer this program. And you can write other programs, not specifically the one that I wrote here, that they could be more complex, and we'll see them in a second. And so a Bitcoin transaction basically is this: it's composed of this input that makes me show that I am allowed to move these Bitcoins around. And then I just reassign them. I can split up the amounts or join amounts together, and I reassign them to different scripts. This time, a program that checks the signature against a different public key, basically giving ownership to somebody else who can create signatures here. Okay, so that's what it means to have a Bitcoin transaction. It's basically some input that satisfies this program and a reassignment of the amounts. And when this is added to the ledger, we strike out the old record from the ledger. And basically, we put in this new assignment of money. So now this 1 Bitcoin was maybe partitioned between 2 individuals that have different public keys. Okay, are we okay up until now? Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is basically what Bitcoin does, but you can write more complicated programs there. And this is an example of an actual program that is used within the Lightning Network. So you can say, more complex conditions for extracting money. For example, you can say, I need 2 signatures from 2 different individuals to appear on this transaction in order for you to be able to move the money. Or you have to wait after a certain period of time to move this money, and so on. And this is what's usually has been later generalized to Turing-complete languages, to more expressive languages that you can write things in, which is what as smart contracts. So Bitcoin has this very simple schema that allows to write very primitive smart contracts, maybe. And this is actually what I'm going to use to construct this Lightning Network over the Bitcoin blockchain as a second layer, something that uses Bitcoin's blockchain, but actually operates kind of above it in some sense. So this is the key idea, right? We want to be able to move money between individuals. And this idea really evolved over time. You can see kind of traces of it in Bitcoin forums, people discussing it, but it was finally put together by Poon and Dryja, who were both of them PhD students at Stanford at the time. They wrote a very nice paper outlining how to take these ideas and put them together to a network of payments that will run together with Bitcoin. And the key idea was to have, instead of using the blockchain every time, you want to have a small set of parties communicate for payments. You don't want everybody to update all the records everywhere. And you only want them to settle the accounts on the blockchain after they accumulated many transfers together. So you want to do it not as often as every payment, because that's a very expensive and slow operation. And the challenge that they faced when they were trying to build the Lightning Network is to make it trustless. So what do I mean by trustless? You really want to ensure that nobody loses funds and nobody has to trust anybody else. We don't know who the people we're interacting with on the network. They could be malicious. They could be out to get our money. I need to make sure that under no circumstances can someone take money that's mine. Right? That's the basic notion that we're trying to maintain. So here's the first idea that started the Lightning Network. Let's suppose we have two individuals. We have Alice and Bob, and they want to establish something called a bi-directional channel, a way to transact between them and to make many, many transfers without touching the blockchain every time. So they do this setup phase that does involve the blockchain for the first step. And what they do is they deposit money into a joint account. So I wrote a single Bitcoin here, but usually, right, the amount would be much lower now that a Bitcoin is something is in excess of 30,000 pounds, right? But usually, just for clarity, I'm using these nice round numbers. So they put two Bitcoins together. One contributes a single Bitcoin, the other contributes a single Bitcoin. And they put it in this transaction that really assigns this amount to a program that requires both of them to sign to get the money out. Okay, so now it's in this joint account. They can't move it without the other person's agreement. So now I want to show you why this is useful. First of all, we have a problem though. Once we put money into a joint account, right, let's say Alice just met Bob and they established this channel together. Now Bob can suddenly disappear. He can go offline and run away. Now Alice's money is stuck in this joint account. She can't get it back. So we want our system to be trustless. We don't have to trust Bob, to be there and to be present all the time. So what we try to do first is we create a transaction that splits the money between Alice and Bob. Gives each one their Bitcoin that they put in, and both of them sign it. And they do this before they create this joint account on the blockchain. So that if the other one disappears, they have this copy of the transaction that they can get their money back, basically. Okay, so that's nice, but we can put our money in and we can get it back if we want, but what's the use of this? So now the idea is, this transaction is not sent to the blockchain, it's kept. Everybody keeps them. It keeps this transaction on their own machine. And we can update the amounts that we split between Alice and Bob. So for example, Alice can say, I want to give Bob a little bit more money. So I will sign a new transaction saying that I agree to split this money 0.9 Bitcoins to me and 1.1 Bitcoins to Bob, and I put my signature here. And then she sends it over to Bob. Okay, so now Bob can effectively add his signature and send this to the blockchain, and now he has a bit more money, right? He gets 1.1 instead of the 1 Bitcoin that he put in. So that, right, gives Bob the ability to withdraw money. We still have a tiny problem, because if Alice gives this transaction to Bob, she can still use this old transaction, which has the old split. So this money isn't really Bob's, it's only his if he posts this transaction first. So to take care of that, right? We want to make sure that only the latest transaction has a validity. Then what we add, and this is a slight abstraction, it's not exactly how it works in the Lightning Network, but let's suppose we add this serial number to each transaction. So this first transaction that is agreement to split a Bitcoin between Alice and Bob has a serial number of 0. And we also add a condition to redeeming this money that you can redeem this after 1 week if nobody appeals. What does it mean to appeal? Just to show a transaction with a higher serial number, a newer transaction giving a new partition of the money. So now, when Alice wants to send Bob a little money, she basically increments this serial number and gives him a transaction with this new division of amounts. And now this means that Alice can no longer take the money from using the old transaction, because if she does, Bob has a newer one with a larger serial number, which shows it was created later. And she signed it. She says, you know, this basically revokes all previous transactions that I signed. So we can think of this as Alice and Bob basically communicating in agreements between them, right? They're sending, you know, signed messages between each other, kind of these signed IOUs. None of it gets broadcast to the blockchain just yet, right? So Bob can always, I remind you, add his transaction here and send it to the blockchain and actually redeem this 1.1 Bitcoin. So he can think of this money as his. Nothing can take it away from him as long as he can post it to the blockchain. Are we okay with this so far? Mm-hmm. So can you see how basically these updates can happen?
Aviv, I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry, Michael Schillig here from the law school. Isn't it possible, because you said that nothing can take away this 1.1 from Bob, but isn't it possible that Alice could still send the old transaction to the blockchain earlier? I don't quite understand how this serial number, as long as it hasn't been sent to the blockchain, how this serial number can prevent this problem from occurring.
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so really what sorry, am I stuck or is it Michael? So let me try to explain. This is a great question. Basically, what's said here in this contract is that once you post this to the blockchain, we are now waiting for an appeal period of 1 week. And as if after 1 week, nobody has shown a newer transaction with a higher serial number, then the money is yours and the split occurs. But if during this week somebody showed a newer transaction with a higher serial number, we are basically going to accept the new transaction. Okay, so if Alice uses an old transaction, Bob has to look at the blockchain. He has to monitor it continuously over time, and he has to say, wait, I have a newer message from Alice that I can send. Okay, is that clear? Okay, great. So this is basically the mechanics of moving money. Did you have a question, Carmen?
Yeah, I think this is a question from
Rowan. Hi, so I have a question, like does the general blockchain, like the Bitcoin blockchain, has also a consensus about the serious number, or how do we get integrated if like they actually recognize the highest serious number?
Yeah, so I'm lying slightly. It's not done with serial numbers. There's a different mechanism in Bitcoin. In Ethereum, it would be serial numbers, for example, because in Bitcoin the language is not expressive. But we do have consensus about the rules to which money is distributed, right? So there was, if you remember, there's this output script, this program that has to be satisfied for something to happen. So part of what's written in this program is, we check that 1 week has passed and nobody has sent a different transaction. You have the language basically to say these things in Bitcoin script, or something that gives a similar effect. I'm simplifying here a little bit. It's really much more complicated in Bitcoin specifically because the scripting system is very primitive. But this is how we would write it in Ethereum, for example. So, so there is consensus about the rules, right? Basically, when a transaction like this is sent, it also specifies who is allowed to take the money and under what conditions. And these are just part of the conditions we can state. So now Bob can also give money back to Alice. He can increment the serial number again and maybe send a different partition of the funds and send it back to Alice. So this channel is two-directional. They can send money back and forth as many times as they want, like thousands of times. And all they do is keep the latest message that they receive that is signed with the highest serial number. That's all they need. Each party can always add their own signature and send it to the blockchain and get this partition of money. So this is how they interact basically without, they do a lot of small payments from, Alice to Bob and back. So let's talk about what we just saw. So the properties of two-way channels, which we like, are that they're trustless. Alice and Bob can always claim their money by posting something to the blockchain, even if the other person is, disappears and isn't cooperative. We can do many small transfers. We can do micropayments if we want, which is just a message sent over the internet, which is not really long to do it. And we only need two blockchain transactions, one to open the channel and one at the end of its lifetime to close the channel. And the balance that we close according to is the split after many transfers. And this really allows us to do fast payments because we don't have to do the consensus mechanism between them, right? When a payment is sent, it's basically just a signed message coming from Alice to Bob or vice versa, or the other way. And that's all that we needed for the payment. So it's really fast as communicating on the internet. As a result, we can charge really low fees for payments. We don't have to charge money. We're only interacting with the blockchain and paying blockchain fees at the beginning and at the end of many payments. So these are the good things about this. We did see some limitations. One limitation is that all these funds are locked in the channel. While we're not using the money, we can't send the money all of a sudden to somebody else. We have to close the channel first. So the money is locked in there under this joint account. We have to have a blockchain transaction in order to later move it. The liquidity constrains how much money we can send. I mean, if the division of funds is such that Alice has already received all of the money in the channel, we can't send any more money to Alice. There's no way to shift more money in her direction. So if the channel has 2 Bitcoins of liquidity, two Bitcoins can end up on one side or the other of the channel. And then, we can't send any more money in that direction. We can send it back, but not in that direction. And the thing we've seen is that payments are only between Alice and Bob here. Right? They established a channel. It's only between 2 participants. And if we think about it really, how often do we really do a lot of micropayments back and forth between 2 individuals, right? I go into a coffee shop, I buy coffee, but they don't pay me back. I get money from a different person, but I don't pay them back. My employer, I don't pay my employer. So this is relatively limited in use so far. And another thing that we saw is that participants need to be online to monitor the blockchain and to appeal. If somebody uses an old transaction, I'm basically being cheated out of money that I should be holding. And I should appeal by sending a newer transaction to the blockchain to show that there's a newer agreement between the parties. So this is actually partly solved by protocols that try to delegate this appealing, right? So you basically send your transactions to some server. So when I'm offline, when I'm asleep, they will monitor the blockchain for me. And if they see something, they have the latest agreement between me and the other node, and they will appeal on my behalf. So there are protocols to do that. But the more interesting thing that I'm going to show you now is how to get rid of this very severe restriction of payments being only between Alice and Bob. And this is where the Lightning Network comes to life and really becomes useful. So what I want to do is go over transitioning from channels between 2 individuals to networks where I can pay anyone and not just the person I'm connected to. And the idea is going to be this, right? If Alice has a channel to Bob and Bob has a channel to Charlie, then we can ask Bob to move money from Alice to Charlie on our behalf, in some sense. So Alice can give him a little bit of money on her channel. She will change the allocation of funds with Bob. 0.9 will go to her and 1.3 will go to Bob. She increments Bob's amount, and she'll ask Bob to do the same on his channel, to go over from 1.9 to from 2 to 1.9. He loses a fraction of Bitcoin and Charlie gains it. So this is actually shifting money. If you look at Bob's total, he gained a little bit here and he lost a little bit here, but nothing really changed in the total amount. So this is the idea of routing these payments over networks, and this is a little bit how how banks might do it. I guess in the correspondent bank systems. But we have a little bit of a problem. And the problem is that we need to have a trustless system. Okay, so we need to decide who goes first. Does Alice pay Bob first, or does Bob pay Charlie first? And I want to show you that there's a problem with each direction, right? If Alice pays Bob before this happens, right? So if Alice makes this payment to Bob first, then Bob might decide not to pay Charlie, and he keeps Alice's money. So he stole money, and we can't have that. In the other direction, if Bob pays Charlie before Alice gives him money, then maybe Alice won't pay him. So who knows? Maybe Bob just paid Charlie on Alice's behalf, and she's not gonna give him the funds. So this would create a problem for us, and we need both of these things to happen together in some sense, to be atomic. So that's the interesting challenge. And this is where we go back to what I was trying to tell you about, which is these cryptographic hash functions. And this is where we use them. So basically, Charlie comes up with a secret S. So he randomly selects a string of bits, a message, and he computes the cryptographic hash of this message, which I denote here by H star. And I want to remind you that if I give somebody H star, this cryptographic hash, nobody can find out what the original message was. It's just a jumble of characters that's seemingly unrelated to the original message. And that's the important property. And then what we do, Charlie sends this cryptographic hash over to Alice. And Alice now says in these messages that she exchanges with Bob, she says, I used to have 1 Bitcoin on my side and Bob had 1.2. Now I'm going to agree to split a little bit differently. Bob still gets 1.2 and I get 0.9. And there's an additional 0.1 Bitcoin that Bob is going to get. I'm willing to give it to Bob if he reveals a message that produces this hash, right? If he gives us the secret when I hash it, I will get H star. And that's a kind of a strange condition to have, but if he knows the secret password, I will give him this money. And the people who currently know the password, right? Only Charlie knows this secret password right now. We didn't tell it to anybody else. Otherwise, after 2 days, if Bob doesn't give us the secret, then the money goes back to Alice. Okay, I can claim the money as Alice. And now when Bob sees this, he says, okay, Alice is going to give me 0.1 Bitcoins if I give her the secret. So I'm willing to do a deal with Charlie. I'm going to shift a little bit of money, right? Charlie gets 0.1 like his old balance, but I'm willing to give him an additional 0.1 Bitcoins if he gives me this secret, because then I can go back to Alice and get the money on the other side myself. I have a transaction that when I add the secret and I sign, I basically have the money. So that in some sense guarantees that if Charlie gives Bob the secret, he can take money, but Bob will be able to take money back from Alice by showing the same secret. Are we okay on what's going on here? It's a little bit more complicated than the previous construction.
Hey, if I could just quickly ask a question, please.
Yeah.
Greetings. Sorry, apologies. I don't have my video on my computer, so it's strange. It's Lyndon Burford. I'm in war studies at King's. What is the incentive for Bob to do this? Because this seems like extra work for Bob, and all he's doing is shifting money for other people. So what's the incentive mechanism there?
You're right. So what's really going to happen in the Lightning system, and I simplified here a little bit, is that Bob is actually going to send a little bit less money than he receives from Alice. And he's going to take the difference as a fee. So this is kind of a service that he gives to others. And to use this service is basically the use of his liquidity. He's going to collect fees from participants. And this is how it's built into the system. So the amount that he gives out to Charlie that I wrote here as 0.1 can be actually 0.09. And he keeps the difference. And of course, Alice would be happy to use this if the fees are low enough. But there's no reason that they should be high, because there's not a lot of work here. It's just a computer sending messages over the internet. So, right, the main cost here is actually locking this liquidity and having a computer online, right, which is fairly cheap. And now what the final phase of this payment is when Charlie actually sends the secret to Bob. Okay, so when Charlie sends the secret to Bob, Bob basically has a message that, you know, if he shows the secret, he can claim money from Alice. Charlie already has the secret. He can already claim money from Bob once he received this second message. So basically the payment actually went through. And Bob can send this secret to Alice kind of as a receipt, proving that the payment has been completed. Charlie's secret has reached her. So she can basically show Charlie, here, I have this secret that you generated that matches this hash. So that's proof that you actually received payment from me. The only way you're supposed to give it out is if you get money from me, on Alice's behalf. So that kind of acts as a receipt.
Can I ask a question from Crawford? He has problems with his connection, so he's typed it in the chat. But the question is whether Lightning networks are just small exchanges. So is Bob a small exchange? And is also who has custody of the assets ultimately? Yeah,
you can think of it as like small liquidity pools of two individuals, right? And I'm exchanging liquidity in this pool for liquidity on that pool in some sense. They are locked in by the blockchain, right? We can't easily move money from pool to pool because the blockchain costs a lot of to do this interaction. So you can think of Bob as doing this, and in other cryptocurrencies, like in Ethereum, Bob can actually be doing this in different currencies. You know, one liquidity pool could be Ether, and the other could be some token over Ethereum, and this would still work fine. And it could actually be between different blockchains. You know, these liquidity channels can be between different blockchains, and you know, Bob can, as long as they support this basic protocol of hash functions and so on. So you could think of Bob as some sort of an exchange or a transfer point. You know, he gets liquidity in this pool and moves it to the other. So this has been the analogy is I think this network of money transmission in the Arab world that was very common. I think it's called the Halwa network. I might be mispronouncing this.
Hawala.
Hawala. Okay. So this is the analogy, and this implements it in a way that is trustless, that you don't have to trust. Bob doesn't need to trust Alice or Charlie. He gets these contracts that basically are guarantees that if he gave out money to Charlie, then he gets money from Alice. So in the interest of time, let me show you some attacks on this protocol, right? So really what the Lightning Network does, maybe I should show you why first of all Bob can't have money stolen from him, right? Let's say Charlie tries to steal money by not giving the secret to Bob. He tries to just publish this transaction, right? So he has the secret S star because he generated it. He can sign this transaction. He puts S star in the transaction as well, and he sends it to the blockchain. The blockchain, however, is public. Everybody can see what's going on the blockchain. It's just copies of the same information. So Bob gets the secret from the blockchain, and he has what he needs to redeem money from Alice. Okay, so there's no way that Bob loses money on the outgoing channel without getting it on the incoming channel. That's a guarantee because of the fact that the stuff has to be put on the blockchain. So on the other hand, we can have Charlie stall and not give out this the secret at all and just wait. Then we have this condition here in every one of these payments that after a few days, the payments revert back to the original person. So you can no longer redeem the money with the secret. So we need to set up the expiration times carefully. This has to have a shorter expiration time on the outgoing channel than the incoming channel for everything to work well. So I'm not going to go into the details of why, but this is a constraint on this system. And now the Lightning channel is really a running network. It's the Lightning network is a running thing. It has a lot of money in it. The capacity in Bitcoin is probably not up to date. It's probably higher by now because it's been growing fairly fast. But it's not on the order of magnitude of large payment systems. It has, I think, when I took this snapshot somewhere around June, I think it had maybe 100 million or so dollars of value in it, and it was doing a lot of payments, but not as much as large payment processors.
So what's the difference between the blue and the yellow line?
So wait, I want to move my thing. So I think one of them is in Bitcoins and one of them is in dollars, right? So
I see.
the amount, the blue amount is in Bitcoins. It's actually been steady, but the value of Bitcoin has been growing rapidly. So it's gone to, right? And people have been adding more liquidity to channels. So you could say maybe the network isn't growing. I think it is growing because people aren't taking their money out and cashing it out, right? But it's grown in value. And I think it's grown ever since by even more. So there we see more channels and more nodes on this network. This is the number of nodes on the network. It's been growing slowly. Okay. So this is just the network. And let me try and show you some attacks if we have time. Alex, you tell us when we have to stop and discuss. So maybe I'll show you one quick attack on the network. This is a fairly simple one. When you want to send money to someone, you don't have to just do 2 hops. You can do as many hops around the network as you want. You're looking for a route to that person in the Lightning network. So you need channels along the way to connect you to this person and to route the funds. And the Lightning network works in a way that the sender actually picks the route. So he has to have first of all, a map of the entire network, which is a little bit expensive maybe to maintain all the time, but doable. And you have to know the liquidity on channels. And you have to know the fees that each one of them is going to take, because the amount you send has to be the correct amount at every point. But all of these things are advertised. And now the sender usually picks a route that costs lower fees. He tries to optimize for his costs. This is at least what algorithms are trying to do. So what we did in a paper with Stefan Schmid and Sal Tochner was an attack that basically added nodes to this network. And what we did is we just formed a lot of channels with very, very low fees. And we showed that the routing algorithms that the network uses just pick a route through our nodes every single time. It's a very simple idea. And every time we get this payment, we just don't relay the messages. They never get to the end point. Then the secret never propagates back. Nothing happens. The payment doesn't go through. And we have to wait for the expiration time, right? So we attract a lot of traffic. We have to wait for the expiration time. And once the expiration time passes, the same algorithm picks another route again. And usually it's again a route through our nodes. And again, we do the same thing. So this attack sounds very simple, but really every time we have to wait for the expiration time is in the order of days or weeks for a transaction on the Lightning Network to expire, which is horrible, right? So when a failed payment tries to go through, it's basically stuck for quite a while. And this attack is very effective. So I will not go into the details. There's a lot of fine print about how each of the different implementations of the Lightning Network chooses a route. We've looked at the 3 popular ones, and we basically showed that for each of them, we can hijack most of the traffic with just maybe a handful of 10 or 20 strategically selected links that we add to the network. Then we get most of the traffic in the network. You have to look at the fees. We look at all the fees and so on. And then we just have an attacker form links to strategically selected locations, and most of the traffic goes to us. I will show you maybe a graph. This is the number of links we added on the x-axis, and this is the percent of the paths between pairs of nodes in the Lightning Network that we hijack. So you can see, like, after 10 paths, we hijack about 80% of all traffic for each of these implementations: Eclair, LND, and C Lightning. And if we were routing in, if we were doing random connections, then we would do much worse, right? This red line is not the performance of the attack, but what would happen if we didn't just strategically select our connections. So that's one idea for an attack. And this really showed us that there's really a routing dilemma. On the one hand, you want nodes to save up on fees, to ask for low fees, that they don't overpay. On the other hand, you don't want to hijack. And another desire is that intermediate nodes gain enough money, enough funds. So they have a minimal fee that they want to charge. So we're not sure that there is even an algorithm that will be non-hijackable, right? That we can assure that everybody is satisfied economically, and you cannot hijack payments this way.
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
So in your attack, what you're doing here, basically, it's a denial of service, right? So the payments do not go through.
Yeah.
But is there a cost to introduce these fake nodes? Because you need to put some money on the...
So I need to provision 10 channels, right? So think of this network has 10,000 channels, and I create 10, and I put some money in them. They just need to have enough money to route the payments that they are supposedly going to route. So that's not a lot of money. And then that's it. We don't do anything else. And we offer really low fees, and then we do nothing. We don't answer...
No, that's clear. But what I'm saying is, yeah, you need a bit of capital to keep.
Yes, very small amounts. So this was a bit embarrassing, but we were in touch with the people who are writing these implementations, and they've made some modifications to the way that they choose routes. We haven't followed up on the attack again to see if we can still hijack, but I suspect that it's still doable and not for very high cost.
Sorry, can I ask another question?
Sure.
Closely related to the last one. But you also you cannot keep the fees when you hijack, right? So
yeah, we're not routing the payment, so we don't get the fees at all. We don't collect.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, what would be the economic incentive for someone who mounts such an attack, other than academic interest, say?
So when we're looking at a system like this, we're extrapolating to a world where everybody wants to use the Lightning Network as the scalability solution for Bitcoin. So this is the global payment hub, right? I'm exaggerating here, but right, everybody pays with the Lightning Network when they go to buy in the supermarket. And now a terrorist, wants to cause a lot of harm, right? And we want to make sure that he can't do this. For someone from his basement can't open a few Lightning channels and basically stop the entire payment system. That would be really bad for us. So you're right that there's no economic incentive here in this attack. He doesn't earn money per se, but if it's really cheap to cause harm to the system, then I would say, this is not going to be Bitcoin's scalability solution, because once it grows to be large enough, people will attack it just for fun, right? And so that's a problem for us. I will show you an attack where people can actually steal funds from the Lightning Network. And this one is fairly easy. Maybe I'll jump to that because we're running out of time. I'll skip this attack, which is another denial of service one, which is done differently. So another attack that we found, this is work with Jonah Harris, a student of mine, is called, we call it flood and loot, a flood and loot attack. The idea here is that when we are connecting to a node, right, we have two evil machines on our side, and we connect on the Lightning Network to a specific user. And then what we do is we ask for a lot of transactions on this route between us and the target. And what happens when you ask for a lot of transactions, these messages between nodes get inflated. They get really large, right? Because each payment has its own secret that was generated in its own hash. So you are conditioning a lot of small payments on a lot of secrets being given out. And there's really a limit on how large these transactions can be. If the transaction gets to be the size of a Bitcoin block, it fills up the entire block, then you can't accept any more payments. And that happens when you have around 483 transactions going through the Lightning Network. That's the magic number that was calculated. When you have 483 open transactions, this transaction size is too large for Bitcoin to handle. So we create a lot of these on purpose. And then what we do is we send back the secrets as we're supposed to. All of the secrets for all of them. And now the node in the middle, what it does is it simplifies this transaction. It says, okay, you showed me the secrets. So basically you can claim the money and I'm going to give you a new copy of this transaction, but this time you can redeem the balances without showing the secrets because I already know you have them. So this is the good guy. He just fell for our trap because we're not going to do the same with his transaction. So our evil node just disconnects and doesn't simplify this transaction. He has to, if he wants to withdraw the money, he has to enumerate all of these secrets. He has to say, here's the secret 1, secret 2, secret 3, and so on. So now we close the channel on our side. We basically take the money that we've sent over to this other guy, but we're going to make sure that this guy doesn't get repaid. And the reason is that he's forced to send huge transactions enumerating all these secrets. And when we perform this attack, we don't do it on just one victim. We do it on many victims simultaneously. So all of them are now sending many, many transactions to the blockchain, trying to get the money that they're owed. They have the ability to collect it, but they're on the clock. If you remember, after a while, the ability to collect money using the secrets expires. There's a time limit for them to take the money. And right, so we're running this in many times, and because of blockchain congestion, not all of them can put their transactions in the blockchain. And so some of them don't recover their funds. And this is basically money that we stole. We got it in this node without sending it out from this node. So we checked to see, first of all, we have to have our nodes connected to the victims. So we went out to the Lightning Network and we tried to connect to different nodes, and we got 95% of nodes agreed to connect to us. The several who didn't either didn't like the balance of the channel that we were offering, or were trying to catch up to the blockchain, are not synchronized with the blockchain, but it was a very small minority of nodes. So most of them are really open to connecting to you because they think of this protocol as trustless. So they don't care, they don't try to vet you. And then they can lose funds. So this is the number of victims on the x-axis that we try to attack and the number of payments that we managed to steal in simulations, right? We don't do the attack in practice. So if the entire blockchain is devoted only to Lightning transactions, then the green line is what we have after we attack something like 80 victims, then with every other victim gives us more and more money. They can't fit their transactions into the blockchain. But the blockchain isn't only devoted to Lightning transactions, it has some activity. If the blocks are half full, then we need to attack maybe 40 victims, and then every victim gives us more and more money. So this is simulations that we actually ran. And this shows us this mechanism, which is based on appeals, right? You can go to the blockchain and appeal if somebody misbehaved, can be overrun by congestion. Like you can think of the courts being overrun by cases, people requesting their money back because they were promised it in some contract. So this is what we are doing as an attack. So I think we're kind of running out of time. So I'll stop here. I have more attacks to talk about: the privacy loss, how the system actually leaks information about who's paying who. It seems to be private, but it's really not. And we are working very hard on to correct that actually. And there we have an economic analysis of this network that we're working on. But I'll skip all of that. I'll maybe leave that as a teaser. And if someone wants, I'll point you to interesting papers on that. So I'll just recap and say that, right, the Lightning Network is really this cool second layer system that runs on top of Bitcoin. It has many, many issues left to resolve. So my opinion is it's not ready to bear the burden of scaling Bitcoin. It's not a robust solution or a robust enough solution to do this. Okay, so and I'll thank you for being so active during the talk, and I'll stop here. Thank you all.
Thanks, Aviv. Are there any questions for Aviv on top of the ones we've asked already? Alex, yeah?
It's more like, it's not directly a question. It's more like I'm trying to sum up for myself what I've learned from you, Aviv, now. And correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just thinking out loud. What you're telling us is that it's impossible to, scale up trustless systems. So that no matter what you do, if you try to, construct a generalized system, as you said, because you used trustless several times, that is confronted with a whole series of problems. So it's not a fail-safe system.
Yeah, so I will say, right, that depends on what you're willing to assume and to do. So one other solution that I've mentioned that kind of gained prominence is this idea of using delegated computation. Maybe I'll explain what happens there. This is actually running in some of these exchanges over Ethereum because you need the kind of stronger smart contracts to do this second layer. But let's suppose I'm going to send my transactions to this special computer, a centralized machine. And that machine is going to spit out a summary of all the transactions. But the summary is not going to be a long one. It's not going to be a detailed list of all transactions. It's just going to be the hash of all the transactions that we've done. So 256 bits in some sense, which is the hash of everything that was just happened. And along with that, it's going to send out some proof showing that this hash is the sum of all accounts after we applied all of the changes that we want. So that sounds like it's almost magical, but computer scientists know how to do this, know how to make sure that you did all of, a really, really long list of transactions, and all you show to prove that you did it is like a tiny, tiny message that you can verify really quickly. And in this model, the system ends up being trustless, but the disadvantage is that if you want to transact, you have to do it through this central server.
But the server needs to be trusted, though, right? It's not really trustless. So the server needs to be trustworthy, right?
It doesn't need to be trusted. I mean, if the server vanishes, then you can still claim your money. You have to go back to the blockchain and show these messages that it sent out. On the one hand, on the other hand, if this server tries to cheat, to move money without your permission or to take money or something like that, then it will be detected and it won't be allowed to do so. So in some sense, this is still a trustless system, but it is based on a single entity. So maybe the economic value of this would be different. They can charge high fees, for example, and you might have no alternative. I mean, you could go to another server that would do different transfers for you, but this is what the proponents really claim. So in some sense, this is a scaling solution. It also has its limitations because the computation that you need to do to produce these short proofs really grows when you do lots of them. But this is something that's been improving. So, but your observation is your basic observation, Alex, that trustless systems are hard to scale, I think is correct. It's been a huge challenge, and there's been a lot of work over the last decade and more on this very issue in computer science. Okay.
So Michael has a question.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Aviv. That was a really interesting presentation, and I've read about the Lightning Network, but it was a very clear presentation, and thank you very much for that.
I think Michael has his hand raised. Did we all have?
Yeah, Michael, I think we hear you. I hear you.
So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Aviv, for a very interesting presentation. I was wondering whether you could say a bit more about this this little word "yet" that you have on your last slide. Not ready yet. So because it seems to me that Bitcoin is so secure, the base layer is so secure because of the economic incentives built in. It's just much more, or generally speaking, much more profitable to act within the rules of the system than to attack the system, economically speaking. And it seems to me, following your presentation, that this is not the case for, say, this layer 2 applications that operate on top of the base protocol. So now I was just wondering what your thoughts are, because if you say not ready yet, then there might be a possibility that
yes,
it actually has potential. Thank you.
So there are a lot of protocol changes kind of in the works that people are considering that improve things. So there's slow progress on each one of them. Maybe a lesson that I've learned in life is that things don't have to be perfect to work. I think if we were living in a world where there was digital currency and somebody suggested that we use banknotes as our money, people would say, you mean to say, my money is going to be a piece of paper that I give out to the store, but I'm going to just print them in my printer and I'm going to have pieces of paper like, how is that going to work? People are going to find all these faults with money that we've managed to get around them. Even credit cards are very imperfect, right? When I pay with a credit card, when I used to pay with a credit card, without not a chip and PIN transaction, but with just giving the number of the credit card, you give it to somebody. Now you just gave them all the details they need to go and charge your credit card somewhere else. Right? And somehow we managed to make these systems work by building a lot of redundancy and fraud prevention on top of that. The business of moving money was so important to us that we managed to overcome in practice all of these limitations. So I'm not overruling the ability of the economic systems to find maybe ways around these limitations. And there is a lot of work on the protocol side from computer scientists as well, right? So I'm fairly optimistic when you see a system like this and it's growing and people are using it, and some of the attacks that we've described are not yet seen in practice. We theoretically show that we can do them. We run them on our own setups of machines in the lab. We basically, we can't do the entire Lightning Network, but I think some of these papers are there to show the weaknesses of the system so that it can grow to overcome them. I know I'm working on, for example, on privacy solutions that I think are very workable. They're going to be very useful if they are applied, and we can solve some of the privacy problems, for example. We haven't talked about what they are, but I think we can get a good enough system in from the privacy perspective, for example.
Yeah, but if I can, but also at layer one for Bitcoin, still the incentives are not there, right? You could.
I also want, maybe I should also qualify the first statement that Michael said, that the Bitcoin works well enough. I also published papers attacking Bitcoin. Some of the base layer can be attacked if a willing adversary, puts their mind to it. And some of these attacks are not on the consensus protocol directly, but on other systems. For example, there are nodes in Bitcoin have to communicate with each other. They have to find each other on the internet, right? You need to know the IP address of the node that you're going to send messages to. There is a system that allows you to learn about the existence of other nodes, and you can attack that system, for example. So there's a layer under the cryptocurrency protocol. There's communication layers. The internet itself is very susceptible to attacks. You're probably not aware of this, but you can hijack. The idea for hijack attacks and so on is because you can hijack information on the internet very easily. You can make it arrive to the wrong destinations and so on, and that's trivial to do almost. It's done thousands of times every day. Still, the internet kind of wobbles along and works, even though we cannot give strong guarantees that the message that you will send will reach the destination and not some other computer, that if somebody is being malicious. So in practice, some of these things can be overcome, I think.
I have a question about your last attack, the attack in which you stole money. So you solved it as a congestion problem, but you could say it's also latency settlement, right? It's the latency in settling things.
Yes,
blockchain.
There's a time limit in settling, and right. It's a sense of blockchain congestion. We have a different congestion attack that I skipped over. That is one that is more directly in the Lightning Network.
Okay.
So I'm kind of thinking of, I'm saying congestion because I'm thinking of the analogies in networking. But basically, you're causing, I like to think of the blockchain as the court, right? You go to the court to settle a contract if the two parties don't manage to usually most contracts that are drawn up don't end up in court. But if you somehow trigger this massive release of contracts that have to go to the court, to the blockchain, then the courts are overrun. And then we can't get justice in some sense, right, for people. That's the example here. So that's the gist of what's going on. You can think of it as congestion, you can think of it as latency or delay, but
because if I looked at it as a latency settlement issue, this is more general for DeFi. I mean, also if you move to decentralized finance, more general.
Yeah, so one of the suggestions we made there, by the way, is to write code into the smart contracts. And this is not currently possible, that will give you an extension on these appeals if there was congestion, right? So you check, if the blockchain was too full, then instead of waiting 2 weeks, we extend this for as long as we need for everybody to settle. And that takes away the ability to attack, and it will take away the congestion as well. So we do have some mitigations for these things that we can suggest.
Yeah, cool. Any more questions for Aviv? Right, it doesn't seem to be the case.
Okay.
And of course, you're welcome to come to London when things are better and we can continue discussion.
Actually, if I could, apologies, Carmine, for interrupting. It's Lyndon here. Thanks very much again. I just want to second what Michael said. It was just a really excellent presentation, very clear and very thoughtful and informative. So thank you. Do I understand correctly that, because I can't recall all of the attacks that you described, but do I understand correctly that the protocol, if it's just a two-way channel, is more secure than once you start networking it through various nodes? or is it that you've found vulnerabilities either way?
No, I think with two-way channels, it is fairly more secure. Most of our attacks are on the mechanisms that connect the channels. But I will say, I think of two-way channels alone as almost meaningless, because I don't see a lot of use cases for them. I mean, people have described things like, I go to an internet cafe and I want to pay for the Wi-Fi. So every time I send a packet, I also send, a tiny micropayment. But, when push comes to shove, you can say, we can settle at the end of a Wi-Fi session, or, it's not that we have to do micropayments for every packet, or, the cafe owner will get cheated out of, 0.001 cents for the amount of traffic that I use, right? So it's a little bit, so I never found a good example, a compelling one where somebody pays back and forth money and
sure. And if I could just maybe one follow-up question, please. You said that you went to the Lightning developers with these, we'll call them bugs or these vulnerabilities, and that they started writing implementations to patch whatever the vulnerabilities you described. It sounds like from your concluding slide that your takeaway is it's just generally not a good scaling solution. There are too many vulnerabilities. So in effect, you've gone to these people who've developed this whole thing and are selling it as the thing that's going to enable Bitcoin to expand gloriously and take over global finance, right? And you've gone to them and been like, yeah, that doesn't really work. It's not going to scale securely. And their response is, okay, we'll work on that. Like, what was your sense of their response? Are they like just super confident that they can code around that they can solve for that problem? Or did they kind of scratch their heads and go, oh, gee, like this is a big problem? Or because do you want to just say a little bit more about that interaction and the response you got from them?
So I will say that when you go to somebody who codes these protocols, usually you don't surprise them. Some of these things that we've mentioned, maybe I should be more careful. Things like the congestion attack, where we steal money, really is described in some sense in the original Lightning paper. They say, if there's too much congestion, you're not going to be able to redeem your money. But then, that ends in like one sentence. And what we went and did is, we went to see how can we do this attack? Can we amplify it? I mean, can we make sure that we hit fewer victims and get more money out of it? And what exactly is the cost in evaluating that? And I think we found that the costs are really low. And so you tell them, here's the our analysis of the attack. First of all, they're all very grateful for this, because I think people who work on Bitcoin really want vulnerabilities to be found out. So nobody wants to hide things under the rug. On the other hand, they are often very confident about their ability to fix something, and sometimes it's like with this ad hoc fix that I have a feeling won't work. You'll just change the attack to do something else, and they are very confident about. For example, with the routing attack, we told them, here's the way we attack the routing attack, and they told us, we changed the routing mechanism. We just had a patch. And now it randomizes in a certain way, and so we analyzed the patch and we did the same attack, and it just works on the without any changes. So their confidence about what solves something and so on, it might be sometimes inflated, but in general these are really smart guys, and they have very good intuition. So sometimes they say things that are correct, right? We can code around it in this way or that way. And there really is a really long list of protocol improvement and changes. One thing, for example, that people are doing is trying to route Lightning payments over multiple channels, right? So the payment would just, split and reconnect and, take many paths at the same time. So they're thinking in ways about writing even more complicated protocols. When I see these things, I'm very pessimistic. I'm saying, the simple protocols don't work yet. So you're complicating it. It will probably have what we call a larger attack surface. I'm going to be able to hit it in many different places. On the other hand, we have seen improvements. So I don't want to be like very judgmental and saying, there's no way to fix it because I can't prove that. But you are correct that they have a vested interest and they want to see the system succeed. They are very invested in it in many different ways. But this is interesting. There's a whole culture of doing these disclosures on vulnerabilities and how to fix them. And there's a whole host of issues on how to do that correctly and how to do that without damaging the system itself. It gets even more complicated in Bitcoin than in other systems.
Right. Okay, so let me ask again if there's some further thoughts for questions. Okay, so if that's not the case, I'll reissue my invitation for you to come to London when things are better, and yeah, we'll continue the discussion then face to face.